Hello and welcome to a very special post-election edition of News9 Plus Decodes. And with us, we have the editor News9 Plus, Sandeep Onithan. Sandeep, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Deepak.
Today, we're going to talk about a key issue in these polls, which is the Agnipath scheme. Now, the opposition, the Congress and its allies, have time and again brought up this issue. Why do you think it was so important, and what was the effect of this issue on these elections?
Well, Deepak, you have to see what the Agnipath scheme actually intended to do. It was rolled out by the government of India 2 years back, the Modi government. Radical reform, because what it proposed to do was to change the way soldiers were recruited into the Indian army. Now, India has one of the world's largest standing armies. 1.3 million soldiers. It's the second largest army in the world. And what the Indian Army has been doing for nearly half a century now is it's being hiring soldiers for 15 years and above. So which means that when you recruit soldiers for 15 years, you are obliged to pay them pension. So soldiers start joining the military when they are 18 and above. And this is soldiers, I'm not talking of the officer ranks. It's the soldiers which make up the bulk of the fighting force of the Indian Army. They are recruited from ages 18 upwards, and they serve for a minimum of 15 years, after which they become eligible for pensions. Now, this scheme as it exists, the recruitment scheme, was introduced in 1976. Earlier on, you had soldiers serving for less than a decade, less than 10 years, which meant that they would join for 5 and 7 years, and they would perform their service and they would leave. They were not eligible for pension because they were relatively young and they could go out and take up other vocations. But now what has happened is post 1976, you had soldiers joining in for longer periods. Engagement periods started increasing, 15 years, and up to it depended on which rank you were. But the earliest that a soldier would retire was after 15 years of service. That meant that you had to pay them pensions. Now, every successive pay commission kept increasing the pensions that were paid, and now it's come to a point when in 2022 the government of India was paying pensions, military pensions, that were equal to double Pakistan's entire defense budget. So if Pakistan's defense budget was $6 billion, we were paying something like $12 billion to the soldiers.
Just in pensions? In
pensions. So for every serving soldier, you have about 3 pensioners. Now, this is not taking away anything from the soldiers, the quality of the soldiers that we have, the kind of service they've performed. Let's not forget, Deepak, that the Indian Army, the soldier, is exceptionally brilliant in the kind of terrains that they're deployed, the kind of missions that they're called to perform. I mean, which other army in the world could have pulled off a Kargil for you, right? But the thing is that when you have a large army like that, you have to start figuring out, am I going to keep paying pension, the pension burden that's increasing year after, every few years after every successive pay commission that comes in, or do I keep money aside for capital, modernization, equipment, right? So what is happening is that increasingly a lot of money was being diverted towards the revenue side, which is basically your salaries, your pensions, the cost of running military vis-a-vis the modernization, right? It was almost 70% of it was running into the revenue side, and only 30% was left for capital. So they had to check to this at some point, which is when in 2022, after much deliberation, the government came up with this scheme called the Agnipath scheme, whereby they would start hiring soldiers for about 4 years. 6 months of training, 3.5 years of military service, at the end of which he would be given the agniveer, the soldier, the short-term engagement. The soldier was brought in on that contract, was given about a lump sum of over 10 lakh rupees, and he would go back into CV Street and look for other employment. So they essentially what they were trying to do is to turn the clock back into what the military was, the army recruitment policy was pre-1976. Now, let's not forget, Deepak, that before you ask me that, was the scheme effective pre-1976? Absolutely yes, because the Indian Army fought the 1947-48 war, the 1962 war, the 65 war, the 71 war. All of these 4 wars were fought using agniveers. These were short-term soldiers. It's engagement for very short periods of time, 5 and 6 years.
I believe Havildar Abdul Hamid was in fact one of these.
Many of our
Yeah.
brave soldiers have all been short-term engagement. So this has nothing to do with the length of engagement of a soldier's engagement period. All of that, bravery and all of these things are not things that can be quantified. In saying that, suggesting that if it's 15 years, only then will a soldier give his best. The Indian Army is exceptional, like I told you, but coming back to this point of it becoming a political issue, now, what has happened over time, Deepak, is that over the last half century or so, you have recruitment taking place from very key states in North India. Now, the armed forces are a very big career opportunity in the north.
Yeah, and in fact, for social mobility,
Yes.
there's nothing that compares to the Indian Army.
Absolutely. So, and historically, that has been the case in the north, where it was a means of increasing the social, empowering, families, villages, castes, tribes, all of these. Military service was one way of accelerating their social mobility. And what has happened in the last 50 years is that states like Uttar Pradesh, top contributors to the Indian Army, Punjab, of course, right? Then you have states like Haryana, Maharashtra. These are all areas where the army would recruit. Rajasthan, of course. So these states in North India, very prime recruitment areas for the Indian Army. And what has happened is that since 2022, in fact, going back to since 2019, recruitment had been paused because of COVID first. There was a couple of years, there was a break for a few years. And then they introduced this scheme in 2022. They put the earlier scheme on pause, or rather the earlier recruitment scheme where you would recruit on an average something like 50,000 soldiers every year to replace on an average 50,000 soldiers who were retiring. So this cycle had continued for several years. And like I mentioned, the army is a very big organization. It's one of the largest in the world, over 1 million strong. Now, in 2022, this system was replaced by this new Agniveer scheme, the Agnipath scheme, and the soldiers were called Agniveers. It was like a tour of duty scheme, where they would do a tour of duty, which is about, like I said, about 4 years in all. What the idea was behind the scheme was to convert the Indian Army by 2032.
So instead of having like a large
Instead of having a large standing army where all soldiers would be eligible for pension, what they had planned to do was to have a small core of soldiers that would be permanently, who would be eligible for pension, that is the 15 years and above, and the large, at least 50% of them, the large majority of them would be from the Agnipath scheme, which means that you would be able to bring down the pension bill over a couple of years, over a decade is what they envisage, when the benefits of this would start kicking in. So it was a very radical, it was a very revolutionary, it was a very forward-looking scheme. But then now what has happened is that you have a lot of states that look upon the military as a career. You have young people in a lot of these states, politically sensitive states, that see the military as a very lucrative employment opportunity, as it always has been. But when this scheme was brought in, it had its share of, let's say, reform pains, right? So when you have a disruption of a scheme that has continued, a recruitment pattern that's continued for almost half a century, and then suddenly that old system is put aside and you introduce a new system, there's a lot of pain that's felt on the ground, because you have, hundreds of thousands of youth who are looking for a career in the armed forces, and now they see that option shut, or they see that the job security that comes with, a military career as a soldier, it's not just the prestige of wearing an army uniform, it's also the security that the government gives you, the Indian Army gives you. You have, your pension is looked after, you have health benefits, all of those things. That was taken away. And I think that has played out very differently on the ground from what we seem to believe, that this would be, acceptable to a whole lot of people. It has had issues in several states. There have been, rumblings about whether the scheme is the right thing, because, India is a young population, the world's largest young people. And when you close off one employment opportunity, at least the employment security, the job security that comes with such a scheme, there are bound to be rumblings.
Before we explore that further, let me inform you about something that I witnessed yesterday while we were covering the election outcome at the Congress headquarters. We came across a small corps, or rather a small group of Congress workers, which were comprised of basically the Veterans Department of the Congress Party.
Right.
Now, they've been running a 2-year-long campaign called the Jai Jawan campaign, in which they have been lobbying against the Agniveer or Agnipath scheme. Now, this was this gentleman that we met here. Let's just listen to what he had to say.
They were endangering the constitution, they were endangering the liberties, rights, fundamental rights, and they were endangering the security and safety of the nation in the name of Agnipath scheme. So we decided to come out and fight for it. So we made a Jai Jawan campaign and ran this campaign under our dynamic under our dynamic leader Rahul Gandhi ji. For last 2 years, since the time Agnipath Yojana was introduced, so we were fighting against it. And during Bharat Jodo Yatra also we talked about it, and then Bharat Jodo Nyaya Yatra also. And for last 2 years we are fighting for it. Secondly, we intensified our fight for last 6 to 8 months. And under Rahul Gandhi ji's leadership, we created Jai Jawan campaign, where we carried out about 400 plus press conferences in the entire country in the month of January. And then thereafter we carried out Jai Jawan campaign, and till now it is carrying on.
So
till now it is carrying on. The aim of our campaign was, one, that Agnipath Yojana has to go out. It is not in the good of the nation. Secondly, Agniveers have to be given permanence. Thirdly, the old system of recruitment has to be established.
One of the things that they've talked about is the complete rollback of the Agnipath scheme. Now, that would be kind of unprecedented. It would be tantamount to, playing with the army's future in a way, wherein you bring one scheme and then remove it a couple of years later. What kind of reaction does that sort of uncertainty bring?
Well, Deepak, the Congress manifesto clearly states that they will roll the scheme back if they came to power. And as of now, they don't seem to have the numbers to form a government. But what they do have are the numbers to stage noisy protests in Parliament, to hold street-side rallies, and this is possibly the very beginning of what you just caught. If they've been doing it for 2 years, you can be very sure that these kind of protests will intensify in the coming months, because a strong, noisy opposition looks for issues. And the Agnipath issue, which the Congress has been opposed to and many opposition parties have been opposed to, is an issue that they would use to hit the government with. And I'm sure this is something that they would pick up in the months ahead for political reasons. I mean, they're looking at it as a vote gathering mechanism to tell people, listen, if we come to power, we are going to roll this scheme back. It's harmful for the country, for the future of the youth. That's debatable, right? Because like I told you in the beginning, the Agnipath scheme was conceived with very lofty aims in mind. It is not to downgrade the potential of the military. In fact, it's to enhance the military potential by
accelerating modernization.
Accelerating modernization, creating, the capital funds, making available the capital funds without increasing the defense budget. Because let's not forget, Deepak, we are already at number 4 in terms of military spend worldwide. We were third until the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, and Russia has now overtaken us as the world's third largest spender. You have the Americans, the US that is. China, Russia, and India at number 4. We spend over $76 billion in defense, and a large part of that goes into revenue, which is, your running costs, salaries, pensions, and the like. So the idea was it was a noble intention. It was conceived out of a requirement to reduce the pension burden over time. I mean, this is not to say that they were going to take away pension benefits. Nobody can take pension benefits away from our soldiers. It is only to ensure that the future pensioners would be reduced in numbers. So you would not have to pay, say, a million or 2 million soldiers in the decades ahead.
Now, while the idea does have its merits, it has evoked a strong resistance from a number of different sections of society. But with your experience with the Indian Army, what have you heard from, say, generals serving and retired?
Well, serving generals, of course, are unanimous in that the fact that the Agnipath scheme is something that they've wanted for a very long time. But pensioners, strangely, are opposed to it. There is a very voluble section of the pensioners who believe that this was literally a reform that was thrust down the throats of the military and the people from where soldiers are recruited, and not enough consultation was initiated. Those kind of issues. But the fact is that, Deepak, I mean, these are some of those issues. These are the kind of issues that the government has to take a call on, right?
These are the tough decisions.
Yes, these are some of those tough decisions. Reform. This is like, I would say that the Indian armed forces have not been reformed for a very long time. And you're seeing reforms across the board now in the last couple of years. I would say in the last 5 years, you've probably seen more reform in the defense ministry than you have in the preceding decades before that. Because in India, Deepak, we only reform after a crisis. Like if there is a 1962 war, the kind of defeat that we saw there, a whole lot of reforms kicked off after that. Officials were purged, equipment was acquired, the military was modernized, a whole lot of perspective planning was put into place. But here, fortunately, we have the luxury of, while we have contested borders with 2 nuclear armed states, China and Pakistan, we have not fought a war, at least since Kargil. It's 25 years. So the idea is that we use this time that we are in this peace time that we have, this peace dividend, we use it to reform and restructure the military. All militaries do that. Some militaries do it when they have the benefits of this peace dividend. Other militaries do it while they're in the middle of fighting a war, like the Russians,
like
for
the
instance.
Russians, yeah.
So the Russians are in year 3 of their war, and they're literally retooling and re-equipping and reorbiting the Russian ground forces as they're fighting this war. This is a war that no one has fought in a long time. So we have the luxury of this peacetime dividend, and we should kind of use it to put in the kind of tough reforms that have been pending for a very long time. And this is something that the government has done. And unfortunately, it would be a very, very sad day if this became another political issue, which basically means that you're going to be dragging the armed forces, you're going to be politicizing it, you will see, possibly street protests, because I'm looking at what the manifesto says, that you're going to roll it back. So if you're not going to roll it back because you don't have the numbers, you will then build up pressure on the government to roll it back, because you have some very crucial elections coming up, and these are elections in states like Haryana, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, which are states which send large numbers of soldiers to the Indian military. So you possibly will have, pressure points building up in all of these states, purely to score political points.
So pressure points building up. Now the Narendra Modi government has never really given into pressure.
Yes.
But with opposition that seems to be revitalized, with a coalition government in power, India seems to be up for interesting times ahead. Let's just hope that we come out on top.
Let's hope the military stays out of all of these, machinations, Deepak, because the last thing we can afford for is our military to be politicized and be dragged into these kind of, noisy debates and, discussions.